The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the parched Wyoming landscape as Rose Blackwood pressed her boot heel into the dusty earth, watching the stagecoach disappear over the horizon. 23 years old and completely alone in the world, she clutched her single valise tighter, surveying the small frontier town of Promise Creek with wary eyes. The year was 1878, and she had just traveled over 1,000 miles to reach a place that already felt like a mistake. Rose pushed a strand of chestnut hair from her face and took a deep breath. Her aunt's letter had promised a home, family, stability, all things Rose had craved since her parents' deaths. But the weathered sign nailed to the door of the small cabin at the edge of town had told her everything. Property of Wells Fargo Bank. Her aunt had died 3 months prior, leaving Rose with nowhere to go and no one to claim her. The town's main street stretched before her, a dusty thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings. A saloon, general store, blacksmith, and what passed for a hotel stood in varying states of disrepair. Men in worn denims and sweat-stained hats moved with purpose, barely sparing her a glance. The few women visible hurried along with baskets or children in tow, their dresses practical, their expressions tired. Rose's stomach tightened with hunger and uncertainty. Her funds were meager, barely enough for a night's lodging and a meal. After that, she'd need work fast. The hotel looked like it had seen better days, but it was her only option. As she approached, the sound of hoofbeats made her turn. A man on horseback came thundering down the street, his dark hat pulled low, his horse a magnificent chestnut stallion that matched her hair. The rider pulled up short in front of the saloon, dismounting with the fluid grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. When he removed his hat to wipe his brow, Rose caught sight of sandy brown hair and a strong jawline shadowed with several days' worth of beard. Something about him commanded attention, not just his physical presence, but a quiet authority that seemed to radiate from him. Their eyes met briefly across the dusty street. His were a startling blue, like the summer sky after a storm. For a moment, Rose forgot her troubles, captured by that unexpected gaze. Then he nodded slightly, a gesture between strangers, and turned away, disappearing into the saloon. Rose swallowed hard and continued toward the hotel. The moment passed, but something about those blue eyes lingered in her mind. The hotel lobby was dim and musty, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet. Behind a scratched wooden counter, a thin man with spectacles looked up from his newspaper. "Rooms 50 cents a night, paid in advance," he said without preamble. Rose placed 2 quarters on the counter, nearly wincing at the dwindling contents of her coin purse. "How long you staying?" the clerk asked, sliding a heavy ledger toward her. I'm not certain." Rose signed her name in the book. "My aunt was Martha Blackwood. I came to live with her, but I've just learned she's passed." The clerk's expression softened marginally. "Martha was a good woman. Terrible thing, that fever that took her. Town doctor did what he could." "I see." Rose's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'll need to find work. Is there anyone in town who might be hiring? Saloons always looking for girls." His eyes flicked over her, assessing. Rose stiffened. "I meant respectable work," the clerk shrugged. "General store might need help. Or try Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house. She sometimes needs a girl for cooking and cleaning." "Thank you." Rose accepted the key he offered, a heavy iron thing attached to a wooden tag marked with the number 4. "Up the stairs, end of the hall," he said, already returning to his paper. The room was sparse but clean: a narrow bed, a washstand with a chipped basin, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the main street. Rose set her valise on the bed and sank down beside it, allowing herself a moment of despair. She'd spent nearly everything she had to get here, believing she'd found a home at last. She crossed to the window and watched as the town continued its business below. The man with the blue eyes emerged from the saloon, speaking with another man beside his horse. He gestured toward the hills beyond town, his face serious. Something about him suggested importance. Perhaps he was a rancher or a lawman. Rose turned away from the window. It didn't matter who he was. What mattered was finding work before her money ran out completely. She splashed water on her face, changed into her second-best dress, and headed back downstairs, determined to secure her future before nightfall. The general store proved a disappointment. The owner, a round man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down before declaring he had no need for help, especially from city girls who'd never lifted anything heavier than a teacup. The insult stung, particularly since Rose had worked her fingers raw as a seamstress in Boston after her parents died. The boarding house was her next stop. Mrs. Patterson, a stout woman with iron gray hair and sharp eyes, listened to Rose's inquiry with pursed lips. "I need someone reliable," she said. "Last girl I hired ran off with a cattle driver 3 weeks in. You planning to stay in Promise Creek, or is this just a stopping point?" "I had planned to stay permanently," Rose answered honestly. "My aunt, Martha Blackwood, yes, I heard you were coming." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "Martha was a friend. She was excited about your arrival." Rose blinked back unexpected tears. "I wish I'd had the chance to see her." Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment. "I can offer room and board plus $2 a week. Work starts at dawn, ends after supper dishes are done. Sundays off for church." "Thank you," Rose said, relief washing through her. "When would you like me to start?" "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp." Mrs. Patterson nodded toward the hotel. "Get your things and come back before dark." "Room's small but clean. You'll share with the other girl, Betsy." As Rose walked back to the hotel to collect her belongings, her mind raced with gratitude and plans. It wasn't much, but it was a start: shelter, food, and a small wage to build upon. Perhaps Promise Creek held promise after all. She was so distracted by her thoughts that she didn't notice the group of men until she nearly walked into them. 3 rough-looking cowboys blocked the boardwalk, their eyes fixing on her with uncomfortable interest. "Well now, what have we here?" The tallest of them, a man with a pockmarked face and yellowed teeth, stepped closer. "You're new in town, ain't you, pretty thing?" Rose attempted to step around them. "Excuse me, please." The man moved to block her path. "No need to rush off. Why don't you join us for a drink? We're celebrating." "Just sold a herd of cattle, got money to spend." "No, thank you." Rose kept her voice firm despite the fear curling in her stomach. "I have business to attend to." The second man, shorter but broader, laughed. "Hear that, boys? She's got business." His hand reached for her arm. "Your business can wait." Rose jerked away but found herself backed against the wall of the building. The men formed a half circle around her, their expressions shifting from amused to predatory. "I said no," Rose stated, her voice stronger than she felt. Her eyes darted around, looking for help, but the few passers-by averted their gaze and hurried on. "Come on now," the pockmarked man said, reaching for her. "Don't be unfriendly-like." The lady said no. The voice came from behind the men, calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. They turned, and Rose saw him, the man with the blue eyes from earlier. He stood a few paces away, his stance relaxed but his gaze hard as steel. "This ain't your concern, Thornton," the pockmarked man said, though Rose noted he took a small step back. "When you're harassing a woman on the main street of my town, it becomes my concern." The man Thornton stepped closer. He wore no visible weapon, but something about him made the 3 cowboys tense. "Your town," the third cowboy, who had remained silent until now, sneered. "You ain't the law." "No, but Sheriff Davis is a good friend, and he'd be mighty interested to hear how you boys are spending your cattle money." Thornton's eyes never left the pockmarked man. "I reckon he might even decide your celebration needs to continue in his jail." A tense silence stretched between them. Rose held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, the pockmarked man spat on the ground. "Ain't worth the trouble. Come on, boys." He shot Rose a final, venomous look before the 3 men shuffled toward the saloon, muttering under their breath. Rose released a shaky breath. "Thank you." Thornton turned to her, and up close, those blue eyes were even more striking, the color of a mountain lake, clear and deep. "Are you all right, miss?" "Yes, thanks to you." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm Rose Blackwood. Thomas Thornton." He tipped his hat slightly. "Though most folks around here just call me Thornton. You mentioned your town. Are you the mayor, Mr. Thornton?" A small smile touched his lips. "Nothing so official. I own the Triple T Ranch outside town, largest spread in the county." "I see." That explained the air of authority about him. In a place like Promise Creek, a successful rancher would hold considerable influence. "You're new here," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I arrived today. I came to live with my aunt, Martha Blackwood, but—" Rose faltered. "I heard about Martha's passing. My condolences." His voice held genuine sympathy. "She was a fine woman. Thank you. I never had the chance to know her." Rose straightened. "I've secured employment with Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house. I was just returning to the hotel to collect my things." Thornton nodded. "Mrs. Patterson runs a tight ship, but she's fair. You could do worse." He glanced toward the saloon where the Cowboys had disappeared. "I'd be happy to escort you to the hotel. Those men might think twice about causing trouble, but it's best not to take chances." Rose hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I would appreciate that." They walked side by side down the street, Thornton matching his long stride to hers. People nodded respectfully as they passed, several tipping their hats to the rancher. "How long have you been in Promise Creek?" Rose asked, curious about this man who commanded such deference. "Born and raised in these parts," he replied. "My father established the ranch 30 years ago. I took over when he passed 10 years back." "I'm sorry about your father." Thornton nodded, accepting her condolence. "What brings you all the way from?" He paused, studying her. "Boston, New York, Boston," Rose confirmed, surprised he'd guessed correctly. "How did you know your accent and your clothes quality material but city styling?" His observation was matter of fact, not judgmental. "My parents died last year. Influenza." Rose found herself sharing more than she'd intended. "I worked as a seamstress, but when I received my aunt's letter inviting me to Wyoming, it seemed like Providence." They reached the hotel, and Thornton paused at the entrance. "Life out here isn't easy, especially for someone used to city comforts, but there's something about this land." He looked toward the distant mountains, something softening in his expression. "It gets in your blood." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Thornton," Rose said. "And I'm no stranger to hard work." He studied her face, and whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. "I believe you are, Miss Blackwood." He tipped his hat. "Welcome to Promise Creek. If you need anything, folks know where to find me." With that, he turned and walked toward his horse, still tethered outside the saloon. Rose watched him go, feeling an odd mixture of gratitude and curiosity. Then she shook herself and entered the hotel. She had a new job to prepare for, and dwelling on blue-eyed ranchers wouldn't help her make a good impression on Mrs. Patterson. As Rose settled into her new routine at the boarding house, the days began to take on a predictable rhythm. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, mostly single men who worked in town or passing travelers. Mornings were spent cleaning rooms, washing linens, and helping with baking. Afternoons brought more cleaning, mending, and preparation for the evening meal. By the time she fell into bed each night, her body ached from the unaccustomed labor, but there was satisfaction in the exhaustion. Her roommate, Betsy Miller, was a cheerful girl of 19 with blonde curls and a quick laugh. She'd been working for Mrs. Patterson for nearly a year and knew all the boarding house routines as well as every bit of town gossip. "You're the talk of the town, you know," Betsy told her on her third evening as they prepared vegetables for the next day's stew. "Me?" Rose looked up in surprise. "Why would anyone be interested in me?" Betsy grinned. "First, because you're new and new faces are always interesting. Second, because you're pretty. And third, because Thornton himself escorted you down Main Street your very first day here." Rose felt her cheeks warm. He was simply being kind. Some cowboys were being persistent. The Harrison boys, Betsy nodded knowingly. "Bad news, that bunch. Work for the Circle H Ranch and think it makes them important." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "But Thornton stepping in like that, that's something. He doesn't involve himself in town matters unless it's important." "He mentioned owning the largest ranch in the county," Rose said, trying to sound casual. Betsy laughed. "That's putting it mildly. The Triple T has more land than the next 3 ranches combined. Thornton could buy half this town if he wanted to." She resumed peeling potatoes. "What's most interesting is he's never married. Every eligible woman in 3 counties has set her cap for him, but he keeps to himself. Some say he's still mourning his father. Others think he's married to that ranch of his." "Well, his marital status is hardly my concern," Rose said primly, though she couldn't deny a flicker of curiosity, if you say so. Betsy's knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise. 2 weeks passed, and Rose found herself adapting to life in Promise Creek better than she'd expected. The work was hard but satisfying, and Mrs. Patterson, while demanding, was fair and even occasionally kind. Rose had saved her small wages carefully, adding them to what remained of her travel money. She had begun to think about the future, perhaps saving enough to rent a small place of her own, or investing in materials to start taking in sewing again. She saw Thornton occasionally in town, usually on his horse or striding purposefully into the bank or general store. Each time he tipped his hat to her, sometimes stopping for a brief exchange of pleasantries. Despite his position, he never spoke down to her, and Rose found herself looking forward to these brief encounters more than she cared to admit. On a crisp October morning, Rose was sent to the general store with a list of supplies. The store was busier than usual, filled with ranchers and farmers stocking up before winter set in. As she waited her turn at the counter, the bell above the door jangled and Thornton entered, accompanied by a lean, weathered man Rose recognized as his foreman. Several men greeted him, and he nodded in response, his eyes scanning the store until they landed on Rose. He made his way toward her, removing his hat as he approached. "Miss Blackwood," he said, "I trust you're settling in well." "Yes, thank you, Mr. Thornton. Mrs. Patterson keeps me quite busy, but the work suits me." He smiled, and Rose noticed how it transformed his face, softening the hard lines and bringing warmth to those remarkable eyes. "I'm glad to hear it. Promise Creek could use more folks willing to put down roots." Before Rose could respond, Mr. Henderson, the store owner who had previously dismissed her so rudely, appeared at Thornton's elbow. "Mr. Thornton, sir, your order's ready. I've added those extra supplies you requested." "Thank you, Henderson." Thornton turned back to Rose. "Don't let me keep you from your errands." "Good day, Miss Blackwood." Rose watched him move to the counter, where Henderson fawned over him obsequiously. The contrast between the storekeeper's current behavior and his dismissal of Rose was stark. When her turn came, Henderson barely glanced at her list before gathering the items with a distracted air. As she counted out the money Mrs. Patterson had given her, Rose noticed Thornton watching the interaction from across the store, his expression thoughtful. Outside, as Rose was balancing her packages, the door opened and Thornton emerged. "Allow me," he said, taking the heaviest bundle from her arms before she could protest. "I'm headed toward the boarding house myself." "That's very kind but unnecessary," Rose said, though she was grateful for the assistance. "My mother raised me to help a lady with her packages," he replied, falling into step beside her. "Besides, I've been meaning to speak with you." Rose glanced at him curiously. "Oh." "The annual harvest dance is next Saturday evening," he said. "A tradition in these parts, good food, music, the whole town turns out." "Yes, Betsy mentioned it. She's quite excited. I wondered if you might do me the honor of attending with me." The request was delivered in the same steady, straightforward manner he seemed to apply to everything. Rose nearly stumbled in surprise. "You want to escort me to the dance?" "Yes." His blue eyes held hers. "Unless you've already accepted another invitation." "No, I haven't." Rose's mind raced. Why would Thomas Thornton, the wealthiest man in the county, invite her, a penniless boarding house worker, to such a public event? As if reading her thoughts, he added, "I enjoy your company, Miss Blackwood. You speak your mind and face challenges directly. Those are rare qualities." The compliment warmed her. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I would be pleased to attend the dance with you." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I'll call for you at 6 o'clock. The dance begins at 7, but Mrs. Peterson always prepares special refreshments beforehand." They had reached the boarding house. Thornton handed her packages back with care. "Until Saturday, then." As Rose watched him stride away, she couldn't help but wonder what she had just agreed to. Betsy would be beside herself when she heard. The news of Thornton's invitation spread through the boarding house like wildfire, thanks primarily to Betsy's inability to keep anything to herself. By evening, Mrs. Patterson was eyeing Rose with newfound interest. "Thornton's a good man," the older woman said as they washed dishes after supper. "Honest in his dealings, fair to his workers. His mother was a fine lady, taught him proper manners before she passed. I'm only attending a dance with him, Rose protested, embarrassed by the attention. Mrs. Patterson snorted. Thornton hasn't escorted a woman to the harvest dance in all the years I've known him. Usually comes alone, stays an hour to be polite, then leaves. He's not one for frivolity. This information only increased Rose's confusion. Why her? Why now? The question plagued her throughout the week as she prepared for the dance. Her best dress, a dark blue wool with modest lace trim, had traveled with her from Boston. She spent an evening carefully mending and pressing it, grateful she'd thought to bring it, despite its impracticality for everyday wear in Promise Creek. When Saturday evening arrived, Rose found herself uncharacteristically nervous as she pinned her hair into a simple but elegant style. Betsy hovered nearby, offering advice and barely contained excitement. "Everyone will be watching," she said, adjusting a pin in Rose's chestnut waves. "The most eligible bachelor in the county escorting the mysterious newcomer from Boston. It's better than a dime novel." "You're not helping my nerves," Rose admonished, though she couldn't help smiling at her friend's enthusiasm. At precisely 6 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson called up the stairs that Mr. Thornton had arrived. Rose took a deep breath, smoothed her dress one final time, and descended to the parlor. Thornton stood by the fireplace, dressed in a well-tailored dark suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. When he turned and saw her, something flickered in his eyes that made Rose's breath catch. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice low, "you look beautiful." "Thank you." Rose accepted his compliment with a slight nod. "You're very handsome yourself, Mr. Thornton." A smile touched his lips. "Thomas," he said. "Since we're to spend the evening together, perhaps you might call me Thomas." "Then you must call me Rose," she replied, surprised by her own boldness. The evening that followed was unlike anything Rose had experienced before. The town hall had been transformed with autumn decorations, dried corn husks, pumpkins, and maple branches with vibrant leaves. Lanterns cast a warm glow over long tables laden with food brought by families throughout the county. A small band played lively tunes while couples danced and children darted between groups of chatting adults. As Thomas had predicted, all eyes followed them as they entered. He seemed oblivious to the attention, guiding Rose through the crowd with a hand lightly at her back, introducing her to ranchers, farmers, and townspeople. "This is Rose Blackwood," he would say, "Martha's niece from Boston." His tone somehow conveyed that her connection to her aunt was important, worthy of respect. Rose found herself drawn into conversations about cattle prices, the coming winter, new babies, and old feuds. Through it all, Thomas remained at her side, occasionally adding a comment but mostly allowing her to form her own impressions and relationships. When the band struck up a waltz, he turned to her. "Would you care to dance?" The dance floor cleared somewhat as they stepped onto it, giving them space that others didn't seem to receive. Thomas placed his hand at her waist, took her right hand in his left, and guided her into the waltz with surprising grace for such a powerful man. "You dance very well," Rose commented, amazed at how easily they moved together. "My mother insisted," he replied. "Said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like a newborn calf." Rose laughed, delighted by this glimpse into his past. "She sounds formidable." She was. His expression softened with memory. Strong, determined, gentle when it mattered, she built a home in the wilderness and never complained even when times were hard. "You miss her," Rose observed. "Every day." His eyes met hers. "She would have liked you." The simple statement touched Rose deeply. "I wish I could have met her." As the evening progressed, Rose found herself relaxing, enjoying the food, the music, and most of all, Thomas's company. He was not a man of many words, but what he did say was thoughtful and often unexpectedly humorous. His dry observations about the foibles of their neighbors made her laugh, and his knowledge of the land and its history revealed a deep connection to the place he called home. During a break in the dancing, they stepped outside for fresh air. The night was clear and cold, the stars impossibly bright against the dark sky. Thomas draped his jacket around her shoulders without being asked, the wool still warm from his body. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "I've enjoyed myself more than I expected." "Is that a compliment or a confession?" Rose teased. He chuckled, the sound warm in the crisp night. "Both, perhaps. I'm not much for social gatherings, but you make them bearable." "High praise indeed," she said, smiling up at him. In the moonlight, his face seemed younger, less guarded. He studied her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow didn't. "You're different from anyone I've met," he said finally. "You don't pretend to be something you're not." "I've never seen the point in pretense," Rose replied. "Life is too short and too unpredictable to waste time on false impressions. A philosophy more people should adopt." He turned to face the distant mountains, visible as dark shapes against the star-filled sky. "I have a proposal for you, Rose, not the kind you might be thinking," he added quickly, seeing her startled expression. "A business proposal." "I'm listening," she said, curious. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, is returning to Ohio to care for her ailing sister. I find myself in need of someone to manage the household at Triple T. The position comes with private quarters, good wages, and the respect due to the person who runs the main house of the largest ranch in the territory." Rose blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a job." "I am." He turned to face her fully. "You're organized, hardworking, and adaptable. The position would be challenging. You'd oversee the cook and 2 maids, manage household accounts, and ensure everything runs smoothly, but I think you'd excel at it." Rose found herself at a loss for words. The offer was unexpected but undeniably appealing. Better wages, more responsibility, a position of authority, yet something about it troubled her. "Why me? We barely know each other." Thomas's expression remained steady. "I observe people carefully, Rose. I've watched how quickly you adapted to life here, how efficiently you work, how you treat others with respect regardless of their station. Those qualities are rare and valuable." Before Rose could respond, the door to the hall opened, spilling light and music into the night. Betsy's voice called out, "Rose, are you out here? They're about to serve the apple pies. We should go back inside," Thomas said. "Think about my offer. There's no rush to decide." As they returned to the warmth and light of the harvest celebration, Rose's mind whirled with possibilities. The evening continued pleasantly, but beneath her smiles and conversation, she couldn't stop thinking about Thomas's proposal and wondering if there was more to it than a simple job offer. When Thomas escorted her back to the boarding house later that night, he took her hand briefly. "Thank you for a memorable evening, Rose. I hope you'll consider what we discussed." "I will," she promised. "Good night, Thomas." He waited until she was safely inside before departing, the sound of his horses' hooves fading into the night. Rose climbed the stairs to her room, where Betsy was waiting, eager for details. But Rose found herself reluctant to share everything, especially Thomas's job offer. She needed time to think, to understand her own complicated feelings about the man and his proposition. In the days that followed, Rose found herself weighing Thomas's offer carefully. The practical benefits were obvious: better pay, more authority, private quarters. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting would fundamentally change her relationship with Thomas in ways she couldn't predict. Mrs. Patterson noticed her distraction. "Something troubling you, girl?" she asked one morning as they kneaded bread dough side by side. Rose hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Mr. Thornton has offered me a position as housekeeper at the Triple T Ranch, Mrs." Patterson's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their rhythmic work. "I suspected as much. His current housekeeper's leaving, and he's not one to leave things to chance. You're not surprised that he'd recognize your capabilities?" "No." The older woman's shrewd eyes assessed Rose. "But I am wondering if that's all there is to it." Rose felt her cheeks warm. He made it clear it was strictly a business arrangement. Mrs. Patterson snorted. "Thornton doesn't dance with his business associates, girl." Before Rose could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Raised voices and the sound of running feet brought them to the window. A group of men was gathering in the street, their expressions grave. "Fire," someone shouted. "Fire at the livery stable." Mrs. Patterson wiped her hands on her apron. "Finish that dough and get it rising. Then join the bucket line if they call for help." She hurried out, already calling instructions to Betsy. Rose quickly shaped the bread loaves and set them aside to rise, then washed her hands and followed the crowd toward the livery stable at the edge of town. Smoke billowed into the clear autumn sky, and the acrid smell of burning wood and hay filled the air. The scene was one of controlled chaos. Men had formed a bucket line from the nearby creek, passing water to those fighting the flames. Women were helping to lead frightened horses to safety, while others tended to those overcome by smoke. Rose spotted Thomas immediately. He was in the thick of the action, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his face streaked with soot as he directed the firefighting efforts. Even in crisis, his calm authority was evident. Men listened when he spoke, followed his directions without question. Betsy appeared at Rose's side. "Mrs. Patterson says we're to help with the injured. Dr. Lewis has set up behind the general store." For the next several hours, Rose worked alongside the town doctor, helping to treat minor burns and smoke inhalation. Thomas appeared occasionally, bringing injured men before returning to the fight. Each time their eyes met briefly, silent communication passing between them. "Are you all right?" "Yes," carrying on. By late afternoon, the fire was finally extinguished. The livery stable was largely destroyed, but thanks to the town's swift response, the fire hadn't spread to nearby buildings. 2 men had suffered serious burns, and several horses had been lost, but most agreed it could have been much worse. Rose was washing soot from her hands in a basin of increasingly gray water when a shadow fell across her. She looked up to find Thomas standing there, exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. His shirt was torn and blackened, his hands raw from fighting the flames. "Are you hurt?" she asked, immediately concerned by his appearance. "Nothing serious." He flexed his hands, wincing slightly. "Burns and blisters. Dr. Lewis says they'll heal." Rose gestured to the basin. "Wash your hands. Cold water will help with the burns." He complied without argument, sighing with relief as the cool water soothed his abused skin. "You've been a great help today," he said. "Doctor Lewis mentioned how steady you were, even with the worst injuries." "I'm no stranger to emergencies," Rose replied, thinking of the influenza epidemic that had taken her parents. "What caused the fire?" "Lantern knocked over by a spooked horse, from what the stable boy says." Thomas dried his hands carefully on a relatively clean section of his shirt. "Ben Miller, the livery owner, lost nearly everything. Insurance won't cover half of what's needed to rebuild. How terrible." Rose had met the gentle, soft-spoken man who owned the stable. He had always tipped his hat to her when they passed on the street. "I'm organizing help, materials from my ranch, labor from those who can spare it." Thomas ran a hand through his soot-streaked hair. "We take care of our own here." The simple statement struck Rose powerfully. Our own. The community had come together without hesitation, fighting the fire, treating the injured, already planning to rebuild. There was something beautiful in that solidarity, that shared responsibility. "I've made my decision," she said suddenly. "About your offer." Thomas's tired eyes focused on her with renewed attention. "And I accept." The words felt right as she spoke them. "I would be honored to serve as housekeeper at the Triple T Ranch." A smile broke through the grime on his face. "You won't regret it, Rose. When can you start?" "I'll need to give Mrs. Patterson proper notice. 2 weeks, if that's acceptable, of course." He nodded. "I'll send a wagon for you and your belongings on the 15th. His expression grew serious. "Thank you, Rose, not just for accepting the position, but for being here today for this town. You've become part of Promise Creek faster than anyone I've known." As Rose watched him walk away to continue organizing recovery efforts, she wondered if she had made the right decision. She was still uncertain about many things: her future, her feelings toward Thomas, whether she truly belonged in this rugged land. But one thing was becoming clear. Promise Creek was beginning to feel like home. The 2 weeks before Rose's departure from the boarding house passed quickly. Mrs. Patterson had accepted her resignation with a knowing look, but no recriminations, even going so far as to help Rose prepare for her new responsibilities by sharing household management advice. "Thornton runs a tight ship," the older woman told her. "He expects everything in its place, meals on time and the house spotless, but he's fair. Work hard and he'll treat you well." On her final evening at the boarding house, Betsy helped Rose pack her few belongings. "I can't believe you're going to live at the Triple T," her friend said, folding Rose's spare dress with exaggerated care. "Promise me you'll visit town often and tell me everything. I'll only be 5 miles away," Rose laughed, "and I'll still attend church on Sundays. It won't be the same." Betsy sighed dramatically. "Though I suppose when you're Mrs. Thornton, you'll have more important things to do than visit old friends." "Betsy," Rose exclaimed, scandalized, "I'm going as his housekeeper, nothing more. For now." Betsy's smile was knowing. "But I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." Rose shook her head, refusing to entertain such notions. "You've been reading too many dime novels. Thomas Thornton is my employer, and that's all there is to it." But later, lying awake in her bed, Rose couldn't help but wonder if there might be some truth to Betsy's observations. There had been moments when they danced at the harvest celebration, when their eyes met during the fire that suggested something more than professional interest on Thomas's part. Yet he had been scrupulously proper in all their interactions, never overstepping the bounds of propriety. Morning arrived with clear skies and a brisk autumn wind. Rose dressed in her warmest clothes, knowing the ride to the ranch would be chilly. At precisely 9 o'clock, the promised wagon arrived, driven by a weathered cowboy who introduced himself as Jake, the Triple T-Tickets foreman. "Boss sent me to fetch you and your things," he said, tipping his hat. "Said to make sure you're comfortable for the ride." Rose's few possessions were quickly loaded, and after tearful goodbyes to Betsy and Mrs. Patterson, she found herself seated beside Jake on the wagon bench, heading out of town toward the rolling hills that surrounded Promise Creek. "First time at the Triple T?" Jake asked as the wagon rattled along the rutted road. "Yes." Rose adjusted her shawl against the wind. "Is it far?" "About 5 miles to the main house," Jake replied. "Ranch itself stretches another 20 miles in every direction, best grazing land in the territory." As they crested a hill, the landscape opened before them, and Rose caught her breath. Miles of golden grass swayed in the wind, dotted with cattle and bordered by distant mountains whose peaks were already dusted with snow. The beauty was raw and powerful, untamed in a way the carefully cultivated parks of Boston could never match. "There she is," Jake said with obvious pride, pointing toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a protected valley. "Triple T headquarters." As they drew closer, Rose could make out a large 2-story house built of solid timber, surrounded by barns, bunkhouses, corrals, and outbuildings. Unlike many frontier homes, the main house showed evidence of careful planning and craftsmanship: wide windows, a generous porch, and a stone chimney that spoke of warmth and permanence. Thomas was waiting on the porch as the wagon pulled up to the house. He stepped down to help Rose alight, his hand strong and steady beneath her elbow. "Welcome to the Triple T," he said, his blue eyes warm with something that might have been personal pleasure rather than merely professional satisfaction. "I trust the journey wasn't too uncomfortable." "Not at all," Rose assured him, taking in her new surroundings with interest. "Your home is beautiful. Thank you. It was my father's pride. He built it with an eye toward the future room to grow, he always said." Thomas gestured toward the house. "Mrs. Collins is eager to meet you. She'll show you your quarters and begin familiarizing you with the household before she departs next week." The interior of the house was even more impressive than its exterior. The entry opened into a large sitting room with polished wooden floors partially covered by woven rugs. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, while bookshelves lined another. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, and though the overall effect was masculine, there were touches: embroidered cushions, carefully arranged wildflowers, landscape paintings that suggested a woman's influence in the past. Mrs. Collins proved to be a diminutive woman with iron-gray hair and quick, efficient movements. She greeted Rose with reserved politeness that warmed considerably when Thomas left them alone. "I've been worried sick about who would take over," she confided as she led Rose upstairs. "The Triple T isn't just any ranch, and Mr. Thornton isn't just any employer. He deserves someone who'll maintain his home properly." "I'll do my best," Rose promised, slightly intimidated by the older woman's obvious devotion. "Your quarters are through here, Mrs." Collins opened a door off the upstairs hallway, revealing a surprisingly spacious suite consisting of a bedroom and small sitting room. The furnishings were simple but elegant: a four-poster bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a small writing desk, and a comfortable armchair near the window that overlooked the ranch yard. "These are lovely," Rose said, genuinely impressed. She had expected accommodations similar to her small room at the boarding house, not this private retreat. Mr. Thornton's mother used these rooms in her later years when climbing stairs became difficult, Mrs. Collins explained. "They've been unused since her passing, but Mr. Thornton had them prepared specially for you." This information gave Rose pause. Why would Thomas go to such trouble for a housekeeper? Before she could ponder this further, Mrs. Collins was leading her back downstairs, launching into a detailed explanation of the household routine. The next several days passed in a whirlwind of instruction. Rose learned the ranch's schedule, met the cook, a cheerful Mexican woman named Maria, and the two maids, sisters from a neighboring farm, and began to understand the complex operations that kept the Triple T running. Thomas himself was often absent during daylight hours, riding out with his men to check cattle or mend fences, but he returned each evening for dinner, which was served precisely at 6 o'clock in the formal dining room. These dinners became a ritual that Rose both anticipated and dreaded. As housekeeper, she was expected to join Thomas at the table, a practice Mrs. Collins explained had begun with his parents, who believed breaking bread together fostered better household management. The conversations were initially awkward, with Thomas asking polite questions about her day and Rose responding with equal formality. But gradually, as the days passed, their exchanges became more natural, even enjoyable. Thomas, she discovered, was well-read despite his frontier upbringing. His father had valued education, ordering books regularly from back east and insisting his son learn literature and mathematics alongside ranching skills. In turn, Rose shared stories of her life in Boston, the theaters and libraries, the bustling harbor, the changing fashions and politics. "You must miss it," Thomas observed one evening as they lingered over coffee. "The culture, the conveniences," Rose considered the question seriously. "There are things I miss," she admitted. "But Boston held painful memories after my parents died, and there's something about this land." She gestured toward the window, where the setting sun painted the hills in gold and crimson. "It has a power that draws you in." Thomas's eyes held hers across the table. "That's how I've always felt, as though the land itself has a heartbeat, a presence." "Yes, exactly." Rose was surprised and pleased by his understanding. "When I first arrived in Promise Creek, I felt so lost, so out of place, but now, he prompted when she faltered. "Now I feel as though I might belong here after all." The admission cost her something, an acknowledgement of change, of letting go of what had been to embrace what might be. Thomas's expression softened. "I'm glad to hear that, Rose, very glad indeed." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Maria entered to clear the coffee cups, and the spell was broken. Thomas excused himself to review ranch accounts, and Rose retired to her quarters, her mind filled with confusion and a strange, fluttering hope. The day of Mrs. Collins's departure arrived, bringing with it the first snowfall of the season. Light flakes drifted from a pearl-gray sky as the older woman's trunk was loaded onto the wagon that would take her to town to catch the eastbound stage. "You'll do fine," she told Rose as they said their goodbyes on the porch. "You've learned quickly and you've got good sense. That matters more than experience." "Thank you for your patience," Rose replied, genuinely grateful for the older woman's thorough training. "I hope your sister recovers swiftly." Mrs. Collins nodded, then lowered her voice. "Take care of him," she said, with a meaningful glance toward the barn where Thomas was conferring with Jake. "He works too hard and thinks too much, has ever since his father passed." Before Rose could respond to this unexpected confidence, the older woman was climbing into the wagon, calling final instructions about preserving the autumn vegetables and not letting the maids slack on polishing the silver. As the wagon disappeared down the long drive, Rose felt a momentary panic. She was now solely responsible for the smooth operation of the Triple T household. What if she failed? What if Thomas regretted hiring her? She was still standing on the porch, watching the snow fall when Thomas joined her. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting her pensive expression. "Yes," Rose straightened her shoulders, "just adjusting to the reality of my responsibilities." "You'll manage admirably," he said with quiet confidence. "You already have." His faith in her abilities warmed Rose more than she cared to admit. "Thank you, I won't disappoint you." "I know you won't." He turned to go inside, then paused. "I've invited some neighbors for dinner tomorrow evening. The Hendersons from the Circle H and Judge and Mrs. Parker from town. Nothing elaborate, just good food and company." Rose nodded, already mentally planning the menu and table settings. "I'll speak with Maria about the meal. I trust your judgment completely." His smile was brief but genuine. "You've made this house feel like a home again, Rose." With that, he disappeared inside, leaving Rose to wonder at the subtle shift in their relationship. No longer merely employer and employee, but not quite friends, and certainly nothing more. Yet there was a comfort in their interactions, a growing ease that suggested the possibility of deeper connection. The dinner party the following evening was Rose's first real test as housekeeper of the Triple T. She spent the morning with Maria, planning a menu that would showcase the ranch's bounty: roast beef from Triple T cattle, vegetables from the kitchen garden, preserves and pies made from summer fruits. The maids were set to polishing silver and bringing out the best china, while Rose herself arranged autumn flowers and berries in the center of the dining table. The guests arrived as dusk was falling. Harold Henderson and his wife Eleanor from the neighboring Circle H ranch, and Judge William Parker with his much younger wife, Sophia. Rose greeted them at the door alongside Thomas, conscious of her dual role as housekeeper and hostess. "This is Miss Blackwood, my new housekeeper." Thomas introduced her with a formality that established her position clearly. Judge Parker, a corpulent man with shrewd eyes, nodded politely. "Martha Blackwood's niece, yes. I handled her estate. Small matter, quickly settled." "Yes, sir," Rose replied, taking the cloaks the ladies offered. "My aunt and I never had the opportunity to meet, unfortunately." "A pity," Mrs. Parker said. She was perhaps 30, with fair hair and a pretty, somewhat vacant expression. Martha was quite the character. The stories she could tell about the early days here would curl your hair. Eleanor Henderson, a thin woman with a perpetually dissatisfied expression, surveyed the entry hall with obvious curiosity. "You've made changes, Thornton. New curtains." "Miss Blackwood's influence," Thomas replied smoothly. "She has an eye for such things." Mrs. Henderson's gaze sharpened as it settled on Rose. "Indeed, how fortunate for you." The slight emphasis on fortunate suggested criticism rather than compliment, but Rose merely smiled and led the women to the sitting room while Thomas and the men discussed the early snow and its implications for the cattle. Dinner proceeded pleasantly enough, though Rose was aware of undercurrents she didn't fully understand. Harold Henderson and Thomas discussed water rights with a forced civility that suggested past disagreements. Judge Parker dominated the conversation whenever possible, while his wife contributed little beyond appreciative murmurs about the food. Eleanor Henderson watched Rose throughout the meal, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "How are you finding ranch life, Miss Blackwood?" she asked during a lull in conversation. "Quite different from Boston, I imagine." "Very different," Rose agreed, "but stimulating in its own way. There's an honesty to life here that I find refreshing." "Honesty." Mrs. Henderson's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "An interesting choice of word. Do you find the East lacking in honesty?" "Not at all," Rose replied carefully, aware of Thomas's attention from the head of the table. "But there are more pretenses in city life, more concern with appearances. Whereas here, we're all exactly what we seem." Judge Parker chuckled. "My dear Miss Blackwood, human nature is the same everywhere. People dissemble, deceive, and disguise their true intentions, whether in Boston drawing rooms or Wyoming saloons." "Perhaps," Thomas interjected, "but Miss Blackwood is right about the land itself." It demands honesty. Try to deceive the elements or the animals and you'll pay a steep price. True enough, Henderson agreed grudgingly. Nature doesn't care about your social standing or your bank account. Winter kills the cattle of fools, regardless of their family name. The conversation turned to preparations for the coming winter, and Rose breathed a silent sigh of relief. Something about Alina Henderson's questions had felt like a test or a trap. Later, as coffee was served in the sitting room, Rose excused herself briefly to check on dessert. In the kitchen, Maria was arranging slices of apple pie on dessert plates. The meal was perfect, Rose told her. Everyone enjoyed it immensely. Maria nodded, pleased. Senor Thornton, he looks happy tonight, more relaxed than I see him in long time. Does he not entertain often? Rose asked, curious. Not since his father died. Maria crossed herself. 10 years, maybe 3, 4 dinners like this, he keep to himself too much. She gave Rose a meaningful look. Until you come. Before Rose could respond to this observation, footsteps in the hallway announced someone's approach. Alina Henderson appeared in the kitchen doorway, her expression one of polite interest. I hope I'm not intruding, she said. I wanted to compliment the cook personally. The meal was exceptional. Maria nodded her thanks, but her normally expressive face had become carefully neutral. And I wanted a moment to speak with you privately, Miss Blackwood. Mrs. Henderson's smile didn't reach her eyes. To offer some friendly advice, woman to woman. Rose stiffened slightly, but maintained her composure. That's very kind, Mrs. Henderson. Thornton is one of the most eligible men in the territory, Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice low and confidential. Many women have set their caps for him over the years, including some from the finest families. He's always maintained a certain distance. I'm not sure why you're telling me this, Rose said, though she had a growing suspicion. Simply as a caution, my dear. The older woman's eyes were cool. Positions such as yours can be precarious, misunderstandings arise. A young woman alone in a man's household, people talk. Rose felt heat rise in her cheeks, but whether from embarrassment or anger, she wasn't certain. I assure you, Mrs. Henderson, my relationship with Mr. Thornton is entirely professional. Of course, of course. Mrs. Henderson patted her arm in a gesture that managed to be both patronizing and dismissive. I'm merely suggesting that. Well, appearances matter even in Wyoming, for your own protection. With that, she swept from the kitchen, leaving Rose standing rigidly beside the dessert tray. Maria muttered something in Spanish that sounded distinctly uncomplimentary. That one, the cook said in English. She wanted her daughter to catch Senor Thornton. Very disappointed when he showed no interest. I see. Rose took a steadying breath. Well, it doesn't matter. As I told her, my relationship with Mr. Thornton is strictly professional. Maria's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she merely shrugged and handed Rose the dessert tray. Time for pie, she said. Don't let that bruiser ruin good evening. Rose carried the desserts to the sitting room, her composure restored but her mind troubled. Mrs. Henderson's friendly advice had been anything but friendly. It was a warning, perhaps even a threat. But why? Did the woman truly believe Rose harbored romantic designs on Thomas, or was there something else at play? The remainder of the evening passed without incident, though Rose was conscious of Alina Henderson's watchful gaze. When the guests finally departed shortly before 10 o'clock, Rose felt a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying ease from her shoulders. Thomas closed the door behind them and turned to her, his expression weary but satisfied. That went well, I think. You were a perfect hostess. Hardly that, Rose demurred. But I'm glad you're pleased. He studied her face. Something's troubling you. Did Henderson say something inappropriate? The man can be a bore when he's had too much whiskey. No, not Mr. Henderson. Rose hesitated, uncertain whether to share Mrs. Henderson's comments. It's nothing important. Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. Alina, then, what did she say to you in the kitchen? Rose blinked in surprise. How did you know? I saw her follow you out. Alina doesn't typically compliment the help, so I assumed she had another purpose. His jaw tightened. Was she unkind? Not unkind exactly, Rose sighed. She implied that my position here might be misinterpreted by others. That people might talk. Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes, followed by a flash of anger. I see. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Rose had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. Eleanor Henderson has been trying to push her daughter Harriet into my path for years. She likely sees you as competition. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was prepared to address. Which is absurd, of course, Rose said quickly. As I assured her, our arrangement is entirely professional. Thomas held her gaze for a long moment. Of course, he finally agreed, though something in his tone suggested the matter wasn't so simple for him. But I apologize for her presumption. You've done nothing to invite such speculation. It's forgotten already, Rose assured him, though in truth, Mrs. Henderson's words had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. The evening was a success, and that's what matters. Thomas nodded, apparently willing to let the subject drop. Good night then, Rose, and thank you again for making my home so welcoming. As Rose prepared for bed that night, her mind returned to Mrs. Henderson's warning and Thomas's reaction. There had been something in his eyes when he'd called her competition, something that suggested Eleanor Henderson might not be entirely wrong in her assessment of the situation. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Thomas Thornton was one of the wealthiest men in the territory, respected and admired. She was a penniless orphan who had come west out of desperation rather than choice. The very idea of him harboring romantic feelings for her was absurd, and yet. There were moments when she caught him watching her with an expression that seemed to hold more than an employer's approval. Moments when their conversations strayed far beyond household matters into personal territories. Moments when the air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Rose extinguished her lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to the soft patter of snow against her window. She had come to the Triple T seeking security and purpose. The last thing she needed was to complicate matters with impossible dreams, or worse, to jeopardize her position by allowing herself to develop feelings for a man so far above her station. Better to focus on her duties, on proving herself worthy of the trust Thomas had placed in her. Whatever might or might not exist between them beyond their professional relationship could wait perhaps indefinitely. Winter descended upon the Triple T with a vengeance in the weeks that followed. Heavy snowfalls blanketed the ranch, transforming the golden hills into a sea of white broken only by the dark shapes of buildings and fences. The temperature plummeted, forcing the ranch hands to work in shifts to prevent frostbite as they tended the cattle in the sheltered valleys where the herd weathered the worst of the season. Within the main house, Rose established routines that brought comfort and order to the long, cold days. Fires were kept burning in the main rooms, meals were served precisely on schedule, and the evening hours often found the household gathered in the sitting room, Thomas reading reports or correspondence, Rose mending or working on household accounts, and occasionally Jake or other senior ranch hands joining them to discuss ranch business. These quiet evenings became Rose's favorite part of the day. There was a domestic tranquility to them that soothed something in her soul she hadn't known was restless. Thomas seemed to feel it too. He was more relaxed in these moments, sometimes setting aside his work to read aloud from one of the books that filled the shelves, Dickens or Twain, or sometimes poetry that surprised Rose with its beauty. December brought preparations for Christmas, a holiday Thomas admitted he had largely ignored in recent years. My mother always made a celebration of it, he told Rose as they sat before the fire one evening. After she died, my father tried to maintain her traditions, but it wasn't the same. And after he was gone, he shrugged. It seemed pointless to mark the day. Would you object if I were to arrange some modest festivities this year? Rose asked, setting aside her mending. Nothing elaborate, but perhaps a special dinner, some decorations. Thomas considered this, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. I think I would like that, he said finally. The men would appreciate it, certainly. Many of them have nowhere else to go for the holiday. With his approval, Rose set about bringing Christmas to the Triple T. Maria proved an enthusiastic ally, planning a feast that would incorporate both American traditions and Mexican holiday specialties. The maids helped gather evergreen boughs and red berries to decorate the main rooms, while the ranch hands contributed carved wooden ornaments and paper chains. On Christmas Eve, the entire ranch gathered in the main house for a celebration that exceeded even Rose's hopes. The bunkhouse cook had brewed up a potent punch, Maria's feast drew exclamations of delight, and one of the cowboys produced a fiddle, leading to impromptu dancing in the cleared dining room after the tables had been moved aside. Rose found herself swept into a lively reel by Jake, then passed from partner to partner as the music continued. She was breathless with laughter when Thomas finally claimed her for a dance, his hand warm at her waist as he guided her through a waltz that contrasted with the energetic dances that had preceded it. "You've worked miracles," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I haven't seen the ranch this alive at Christmas since my mother was alive." Rose flushed with pleasure at his praise. "Everyone contributed, I merely organized. You did far more than that." His blue eyes were warm as they met hers. "You've brought light back to this house, Rose, to all of us." He hesitated, then added, "To me." Before Rose could respond to this unexpectedly personal admission, the music ended, and they were surrounded by clapping cowboys demanding another tune. The moment passed, but Rose carried the memory of it and of Thomas's words through the remainder of the evening and into her dreams that night. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the sun glittering on the snow-covered landscape with diamond brilliance. After a festive breakfast, Thomas surprised Rose with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials stamped in gold on the cover. "I remembered you mentioning that you used to keep a journal in Boston," he said, as she ran her fingers over the supple leather. "I thought perhaps you might wish to resume the practice." "It's beautiful," Rose said, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Thomas." She had a gift for him as well, a hand-knitted scarf in a deep blue that matched his eyes, crafted during the quiet evenings when he'd been occupied with ranch business. "It's not much," she said as he unwrapped it, "but I noticed your old one was rather worn." Thomas wrapped the scarf around his neck, his expression one of genuine pleasure. "It's perfect," he said, "and all the more valuable knowing you made it yourself." The day passed in quiet contentment, with Thomas and Rose sharing a private dinner that evening after the larger celebrations with the ranch hands had concluded. As they sat before the fire afterward, Thomas seemed lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the flames. "A penny for your thoughts," Rose said, breaking the comfortable silence. He glanced up, a small smile touching his lips. "I was thinking about change," he said, "about how different this Christmas has been from those of recent years. How different my life has become in the months since you arrived." There was something in his voice, a note of intensity that made Rose's heart beat faster. "Different in a good way, I hope, in the best possible way." He set aside his coffee cup and leaned forward slightly. "Rose, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you, something important." Before he could continue, a commotion outside interrupted the moment's shouts and the sound of horses arriving at a gallop. Thomas was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "Riders," he said, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern. "Coming fast at night in this weather, something's wrong." He strode to the front door, Rose following close behind. The porch lantern illuminated Jake and two other cowboys, their horses blowing steam in the frigid air. "Boss," Jake called, dismounting quickly. "Fire at the Wilkins place, started in the barn, spread to the house. They've got the family out, but they're fighting to save what they can. Sent for help." Thomas was already issuing orders, his voice calm but urgent. "Gather every man who can ride. Blankets, water buckets, axes, and wake Maria will need food and coffee for after." He turned to Rose, his expression grim. "The Wilkins farm is 15 miles east, small place, good people. New to ranching, not well prepared for winter emergencies." "Go," Rose said immediately. "I'll help Maria prepare provisions and make sure everything is ready for when you return." Thomas nodded, already moving toward the barn. "We may bring them back with us if the house is lost. Prepare the guest rooms just in case." The next hours were a flurry of activity as Rose directed the household's response to the emergency. Maria was set to baking bread and making stew that could be quickly reheated, while the maids prepared bedrooms and gathered spare clothing and blankets. Rose herself inventoried medical supplies, knowing burns and exposure to the cold were likely. It was nearly dawn when the men returned, bringing with them the Wilkins family, a young couple and their 3 small children, all exhausted, smoke-stained, and shell-shocked. The house had been partially saved, Jake reported, but was uninhabitable until repairs could be made. The barn and livestock, tragically, had been lost entirely. Rose quickly organized hot baths for the children, fresh clothing for all, and a warming meal in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room. Mrs. Wilkins, a slender woman barely out of her teens, broke down in tears when Rose showed her the room prepared for her family. "How can we ever repay such kindness?" she asked, clutching her youngest child, a girl of perhaps 2. "There's no need," Rose assured her. "This is what neighbors do for each other." From the doorway, Thomas observed this exchange, his expression unreadable. When Rose turned and saw him there, he nodded slightly, a gesture of approval that warmed her more than any spoken praise could have. In the days that followed, the Triple T became a haven for the displaced family. Mr. Wilkins joined the ranch hands in their daily work, grateful for the opportunity to earn his keep, while his wife helped in the kitchen and with household chores. The children brought an unexpected liveliness to the house, their initial shyness giving way to natural exuberance as they explored their temporary home under Rose's watchful eye. Thomas, to Rose's surprise, showed remarkable patience with the youngsters, answering their endless questions about ranch life and even allowing the oldest boy, a serious 6-year-old named David, to accompany him on short rides around the ranch yard. "You're good with children," Rose observed one evening after the Wilkins family had retired. "I wouldn't have expected that." Thomas smiled slightly. "My father always said children and horses have much in common. They sense fear, respect honesty, and respond best to calm guidance rather than harsh commands." "Wise words," Rose agreed. "Your father sounds like a remarkable man." "He was." Thomas's expression grew reflective. "He would have liked you, Rose. Your practicality, your strength, your kindness, these were qualities he valued highly." The compliment touched her deeply. "I wish I could have met him, and your mother, so do I." Thomas held her gaze for a long moment. "They would have seen in you what I see, someone special, someone rare." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken emotions. Rose felt her heart racing, aware that they were approaching a threshold neither had dared to cross before. Before either could speak, however, a small voice interrupted from the doorway. "Miss Rose, I had a bad dream." Little Sarah Wilkins stood there in her nightgown, her eyes wide and frightened, her small hands clutching a worn rag doll. The moment between Thomas and Rose dissolved as she went to comfort the child, leading her back to bed with soothing words and a promise to leave the lamp burning. By the time she returned to the sitting room, Thomas had retired to his study, the opportunity for deeper conversation lost once more. January brought bitter cold and howling blizzards that kept the ranch largely isolated for weeks at a time. The Wilkins family remained at the Triple T, their own homestead deemed unsafe until spring thaws would allow proper repairs. Rose found herself increasingly busy managing the enlarged household, ensuring supplies remained adequate, and maintaining the routines that kept everyone's spirits up during the long, dark days. Despite the challenges, there was a warmth and vitality to the house that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Meals became communal affairs filled with conversation and laughter. Evenings brought shared activities, reading aloud, card games, music when one of the hands brought his harmonica or fiddle to the main house. Even Thomas seemed to thrive in this atmosphere, his natural reserve giving way to a quiet enjoyment of the impromptu community that had formed under his roof. Rose found herself watching him during these times, noting how the harsh lines of his face softened when he laughed, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, how gentle his hands could be when helping little Sarah onto his lap for a story. She was developing feelings for him that went far beyond gratitude or professional respect, feelings that both thrilled and frightened her with their intensity. But always, there remained a careful distance between them, a boundary neither seemed willing to cross. Thomas was unfailingly kind, increasingly open in his conversations with her, and clearly valued her presence in his home. Yet he never again came as close to a personal declaration as he had on Christmas night before the interruption. As January gave way to February, Rose began to wonder if she had misinterpreted his intentions, if what she had perceived as growing affection was merely appreciation for her management of his household during a challenging time. The thought brought an ache she tried to ignore as she focused on her duties. The situation came to a head on a particularly fierce February night when wind howled around the eaves of the house and snow piled in drifts against the windows. The Wilkins children had been put to bed, their parents had retired early, and most of the ranch hands had remained in the bunkhouse rather than venturing to the main house through the storm. Rose was in the kitchen, going over accounts with Maria for the monthly supply order that would be sent to town once the weather cleared, when Thomas entered, bringing a blast of cold air with him. "Just checked the barns," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "All secure, but it's getting worse out there. This might be the worst storm of the season." "There's coffee," Rose offered, gesturing to the pot kept warm on the stove. "And Maria's cinnamon cake from supper. Perfect." Thomas poured himself a cup and cut a slice of cake, joining them at the kitchen table. For a time, they discussed practical matters: how long the storm might last, whether supplies would hold out, which cattle might be at risk in the outlying pastures. When Maria excused herself to check on bread dough rising near the stove, Thomas turned his attention fully to Rose. "You look tired," he observed, his voice gentle. "You've been working too hard, taking care of everyone." "I'm fine," Rose assured him, though in truth, the constant demands of the enlarged household had been taxing. "It's what I'm here for after all." "No," Thomas said, surprising her with his firmness. "You're here to manage my household, not to exhaust yourself caring for half the county." "The Wilkins needed help," Rose pointed out. "Would you have turned them away?" "Of course not." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But I worry about you. You never complain, never ask for assistance, never seem to rest." His concern warmed her. "I'm stronger than I look, remember. Besides helping others, it gives me purpose, makes me feel like I belong." Thomas's expression changed, something flickering in his eyes. "Do you feel that way, like you belong here?" "Most of the time," Rose admitted. "But then I remember." "Remember what?" he prompted when she fell silent. "That this isn't really my home. That I'm here as your employee, not—" She couldn't finish the thought. "Not what, Rose?" Thomas's voice had dropped lower, his blue eyes intent on her face. Before she could answer, a tremendous crash shook the house, followed by the sound of splintering wood and a rush of freezing air. Thomas was on his feet instantly, rushing toward the source of the disturbance with Rose close behind. In the sitting room, they found disaster. A massive tree branch had crashed through one of the windows, driven by the storm's fury. Snow and ice were already blowing in, coating the furniture and floor with white. "Maria," Thomas called, "bring nails, hammer, whatever boards you can find. Rose, help me clear this branch before it does more damage." For the next hour, they worked frantically to secure the house against the elements. The branch was dragged out with great effort, and Thomas nailed boards across the shattered window while Rose and Maria mopped up melting snow and moved furniture away from the damaged area. Remarkably, the commotion hadn't wakened the Wilkins family, whose rooms were on the opposite side of the house. By the time they had done all they could, all three were exhausted and chilled. Maria went to check that her kitchen hadn't suffered damage from the commotion, leaving Rose and Thomas alone in the partially dark sitting room, illuminated only by a single lamp and the dying fire. "That should hold until morning," Thomas said, surveying their handiwork. "We'll need to order new glass from Cheyenne when the road's clear." "At least no one was hurt," Rose said, rubbing her arms against the lingering chill. Though they had blocked the broken window as best they could, the room remained much colder than usual. Thomas noticed her discomfort immediately. "You're freezing," he said, moving to stoke the fire before guiding her to sit on the sofa nearest the hearth. He disappeared briefly, returning with a blanket which he wrapped around her shoulders. Then, to her surprise, he sat beside her rather than taking his usual chair. "Better." He asked, his voice gentle. Yes, thank you. Rose pulled the blanket tighter, acutely aware of his proximity. That was quick thinking with the boards. Ranch life teaches you to handle emergencies. He smiled slightly. Though I admit, a tree through the window is a new one. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, listening to the wind howl outside and the occasional pop of the fire. Rose felt herself relaxing, the warmth of the fire and Thomas's presence beside her creating a cocoon of safety despite the storm raging beyond the walls. You never finished what you were saying, Thomas said suddenly. In the kitchen before the crash about belonging, Rose tensed slightly, unsure how to respond. It wasn't important. It was to me. His voice was low, serious. You were saying this isn't really your home, that you're here as my employee, not. What? Rose stared into the fire, gathering her courage. Not as someone who truly belongs, she said finally. Not as family. Thomas was silent for so long that Rose feared she had overstepped, revealed too much of her inner thoughts. When she finally dared to look at him, she found his eyes on her face, his expression one of tender intensity. Is that what you want, Rose, to belong here? To be more than an employee in this house, her heart hammered in her chest. What are you asking me, Thomas? He shifted on the sofa, turning to face her more directly. I'm asking if you could see yourself making a life here, not as my housekeeper, but as, he took a deep breath, as my wife. The word hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. Rose felt dizzy with the suddenness of it, though in retrospect, perhaps it had been building toward this moment for months. Your wife, she repeated, scarcely believing she had heard correctly. Thomas, I'm a penniless orphan from Boston. You're one of the wealthiest ranchers in Wyoming. People would say, I don't give a damn what people would say, he interrupted, his voice fierce. I care what you would say, what you feel. Rose faltered, overwhelmed. This is so unexpected. Is it? Thomas's hand found hers beneath the blanket. Haven't you felt it growing between us? This connection, this understanding? Yes, she admitted. But I never dared hope it might lead to marriage. The differences in our positions mean nothing to me, he finished firmly. Rose, when my father built this house, he told me it would never truly be a home until I found the right woman to share it with. For years after my parents died, I thought that would never happen. I buried myself in work, in building the ranch, in becoming the man my father hoped I would be. And then you arrived in Promise Creek. His fingers tightened around hers. From that first day when I saw you standing up to those cowboys, there was something about you that called to me. Your courage, your dignity, your determination. The more I've come to know you, the more certain I've become that you are that woman, the one who can make this house a home again, who can make me whole again. Tears filled Rose's eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. I never belonged anywhere, not really, she whispered. Not in Boston after my parents died, not in Promise Creek when I arrived. I felt so lost, so alone. You belong here, Thomas said, echoing words he had never actually spoken but which had lived in her heart since the day he'd escorted her down the main street of Promise Creek. You belong with me. With gentle fingers, he tilted her face up to his. I love you, Rose Blackwood. I think I've loved you since that first day. Will you marry me? Will you make this ranch your home, make this man your husband? In that moment, all of Rose's doubts and fears seemed to dissolve. The differences in their stations, the potential for gossip, the uncertainty of the future, none of it mattered compared to the truth shining in Thomas's eyes and echoing in her own heart. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Yes, I'll marry you, Thomas. I love you too, so much more than I ever thought possible. His smile was radiant as he drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within the walls of the Triple T Ranch, Thomas and Rose had found a shelter more enduring than timber and stone. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had both found home. The wedding took place in early April, when the snow had mostly melted and the first green shoots of spring were pushing through the softening earth. Rose had wanted a simple ceremony, but it seemed all of Promise Creek had other ideas. The small church in town was filled to capacity with well-wishers, ranchers and townspeople, cowboys and shopkeepers, all gathered to see Thomas Thornton wed the woman who had captured his heart. Eleanor Henderson was notably absent, though her husband attended with their daughter Harriet, both offering stiff but polite congratulations. Judge Parker performed the ceremony with unexpected warmth, his usual pomposity softened by the evident joy of the couple before him. Rose wore a gown of ivory silk that had arrived from Cheyenne just days before the wedding, a gift from Thomas that had left her speechless with its elegance and perfect fit. Betsy stood as her maid of honor, while Jake served as Thomas's best man. The Wilkins children, now settled back in their repaired homestead but frequent visitors to the Triple T, scattered wildflower petals along the aisle as Rose walked toward Thomas, her hand resting on the arm of Mr. Wilkins, who had offered to stand in for her father. She felt a sense of rightness, of completion that brought tears to her eyes. Thomas waited for her at the altar, his face solemn but his blue eyes alight with love and pride. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken clearly before the assembled community that had become their extended family. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with a tenderness that belied the strength of his arms around her. The church erupted in cheers and applause, celebration continuing long into the night at the Triple T, where tables had been set up in the ranch yard and lanterns hung from trees to illuminate the dancing and feasting. As twilight deepened into night, Thomas led Rose away from the festivities to a quiet spot where they could see the lights of the celebration but enjoy a moment of privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Thornton?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I'm still getting used to the name," he chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her. "You'll have time, a lifetime, in fact." Rose turned in his arms to face him, her expression growing serious. "I want you to know something, Thomas. When I came west, I felt so lost, so adrift. I didn't think I would ever find a place where I truly belonged. And now," he prompted, his fingers gently tracing the curve of her cheek, "now I know that belonging isn't about a place at all. It's about a person." She smiled up at him, her heart full. "I belong with you, Thomas Thornton. Wherever you are, that's my home." His kiss was answer enough, sealing a promise that would endure through all the seasons to come, through summer heat and winter storms, through the joys and challenges that life would inevitably bring. They had found in each other not just love, but a sense of belonging that neither had believed possible. And as they returned hand in hand to the celebration, to the community that had witnessed their journey from strangers to beloved partners, Rose knew with absolute certainty that the lost, lonely woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Promise Creek less than a year ago was gone forever. In her place stood Mrs. Rose Thornton, confident, loved, and finally, completely home. 5 years later, the Triple T Ranch had grown even more prosperous under Thomas's careful management and Rose's efficient household direction. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family: 3-year-old James, named for Thomas's father, and 1-year-old Martha, named for Rose's aunt. A third child was expected in the fall, bringing fresh joy to the household. On a warm summer evening, Thomas and Rose sat on the wide porch that wrapped around their home, watching James chase fireflies in the gathering dusk while Martha slept peacefully in Rose's arms. The sound of cowboy songs drifted from the bunkhouse, a gentle accompaniment to the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life," Rose said softly, leaning her head against her husband's shoulder. "How far we've come from that day in Promise Creek." Thomas took her free hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I knew even then, you know. When I saw you standing up to those cowboys, your chin raised despite your fear, I thought to myself, there's a woman who could tame this wild country." Rose laughed. "I was terrified and completely lost." "Not lost," Thomas corrected gently. "Just not yet found." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I count finding you as the greatest blessing of my life." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, James ran back to them, out of breath and grinning with the simple joy of childhood. Thomas scooped him up, settling the boy on his knee. "Tell me the story, Papa," James requested, his blue eyes so like his father's bright with anticipation. About how you and Mama met. Thomas exchanged a smile with Rose over their son's head. Well, son, it all began when your mother arrived in Promise Creek, looking like she didn't quite know where she belonged in this big, wild world. And your father, Rose continued, her voice warm with memory, very wisely told me exactly where I belonged. With him, James finished, familiar with the tale. And now we all belong together. That's right, Thomas agreed, gathering his family closer as the first stars winked to life above the Triple T Ranch. That's exactly right. As darkness settled fully over the Wyoming landscape they had both come to love, Rose Thornton closed her eyes in gratitude. She had traveled so far from the lost, lonely woman who had arrived in Promise Creek with nothing but hope and determination. In finding Thomas, she had found not just a husband, but a home, a family, a purpose, everything she had ever longed for and more than she had dared to dream. I love you, she whispered to the man beside her, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. And I love you, Thomas replied, his voice holding all the certainty of the mountains that surrounded their land, always and forever. In the vast wilderness of Wyoming territory, where life could be harsh and unforgiving, Thomas and Rose Thornton had created something rare and precious, a haven of love, strength, and belonging that would endure through all the seasons of their lives together. What had begun with a chance meeting on a dusty street had blossomed into a love story written across the magnificent canvas of the American West, a testament to the power of two hearts finding in each other the home they had always sought.